Hi everyone! Again, my name's Chantal Raguin, and I was with the Wildlife Conservation Society this summer in Ennis, Montana. For those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, we are a global nonprofit. We work in about 60 different countries, and we prioritize those countries into regions, we like to call them, to help us kind of compartmentalize our work. You're probably most familiar with the New York region because we run and operate all the zoos in the city. So Bronx Zoo, that's us. And I was not in New York at all. I was on the opposite side of the coast in the Rockies, and that was a completely new experience for me. That was part of the reason why I was drawn to the work, as I'll kind of share with you more later. And mostly what my work in Montana was doing, which is where I was based, was developing a communication strategy for the Rockies as a whole. The organization was a really big developmental kind of reinventing phase, and so I was charged with thinking about how they were going to develop a long-term strategy, really long after I was gone, that they were going to use throughout their time there. And so I like to think about that work as storytelling. And so I learned a lot about telling stories, and particularly conservation stories, while I was in Montana. And really what I learned, I think the crux of what I learned, is that the way we tell conservation stories, particularly in the Rockies, needs to change and evolve. Because the conservation movement and the climate change movement has really evolved since the beginning of when we started conservation, way back with Theodore Roosevelt. And the stories that we've told have not yet evolved. And so that's what I really want to talk to you about today. And so to start, I want to talk to you about what the Rockies were. And a good starting point for me with that is to talk about how I first came to WCS and my experience coming to the Rockies. I grew up in Massachusetts, going to school in New York now, and so I heard about this internship in Ennis, Montana, which is population just a little over 1,000, and I'm from this university, pretty big, seems pretty new to me. But I say new and not foreign, and that's because the Rockies region are really immortalized in our American culture. Theodore Roosevelt started Yellowstone Park, set aside massive land conservation. He has this kind of tough guy, rugged wilderness vibe that we really like and hold dear. John Muir, Sierra Club, guy goes out in the wilderness and journals about his experience in the woods, and we love that. That's great. Ansel Adams, beautiful photography of the West. And these are images and people that we hold really, really dear to our stories about conservation, and they're really propelling a lot of the Western vibe that we like to hold kind of on a pedestal. And I totally agree with it. I went to the Rockies and I loved it, and I felt that. I felt the reason that we still hold that really dear. So where's the communication challenge? What the Rockies are now is not necessarily that same story of what the Rockies were. Yes, the mountains are still as beautiful as they were in the Ansel Adams photography. Yes, it's still great to get out in nature and just be alone and contemplate. But the Rockies as a region are really undergoing a huge demographic, population, and economic change. To give you a little taste of that, the agricultural and extractive industries that usually were dominating the region are now also dealing with outdoor activists, adventurists. We have new economies popping up that aren't necessarily based just around those single industries. And some people like to call this the Old West, New West dichotomy. There's a lot of people moving in that aren't necessarily tied to that land of the region and are kind of working remote. We also have Latinx people that are going to comprise the majority of the population in many Western states. This is new in modern history. We also have tribal nations and indigenous communities that continue to fight for their sovereign rights to the land and are doing this ever more so successfully. So that's a lot of different interest groups, cultures, and values that are going to be conflicting and somewhat at odds in what happens in the rest of the conservation of this large land, all the species on it, because everyone has different thoughts for how they want to use that land, and righteously so. A lot of people have different claims to the land, and that's perfectly okay. But the problem with conservation now is that people see these identities at odds. And the conservation story that we've been telling is that it's this one singular person who goes off onto their own and contemplates what the wilderness means to them, and then that's how it happens. But we aren't really having any reaction or interaction between these groups, and it's making it really hard to find common ground. And that's where the conservation work needs to be happening now. We've already set apart some large plots of land, and we don't necessarily need to set apart more. We just need to protect them and get to common ground on why we need to protect them. So my task was really reinventing the story of conservation in a way that's going to put this compromise and interaction at the forefront. And so we did a literature review with WCS to kind of find a way to build movements, and particularly to build movements in a way that builds coalitions from many different diverse groups. And that's why I have this graphic here about interaction and identity. So these two things are interrelated when you build a movement. When you have interactions between diverse groups of people, that can help them find common ground. And particularly if you have them perform the same action that lets them see themselves as similar to another person and form group identity. Here we have the identity. Now that you have that group identity, they have likely more interactions between those once dissimilar groups, and again, strengthens the group identity even more. So it's a cycle. And it can be really a positive thing if you're trying to build and bridge gaps. Oh, and this is where we're going to have to click out to go to the video. So as I'm pulling that up, I'll share with you the strategy that WCS came up with was building the Society of the Wild. And we had this idea for a film, filming different people's takes on wild, and letting them build that interaction and that group identity from the ground up, kind of flipping typical communication strategy on its head. Instead of having an audience and catering to them, we choose our audiences and bring their messages to us and then uplift them. And so the video that I created is kind of a demo for that and will be used for later strategy, if I can get out of the... Here we go.
Wild. My wild is being outdoor anywhere really.
Place that's still free.
Being able to be surrounded by all the wildlife and mountains and trees. I can teach my child just what it's like to be sharing space with, animals and people all living in harmony.
A place that you can escape to that still exists, that's not broken up into a bunch of little pieces, but a place where you can just get out and experience what it's like to be a part of this place instead of apart from it.
It's hard to explain. It's just this feeling that you get.
Wild is to catch the power of nature. Wild is being fearlessly and authentically yourself. Wild means not caring about what other people think and just doing what you feel in the moment.
Get out in the wilderness and do what you want.
My wild is when I was a little boy growing up in the 80s on a farm and ranch in Circle, Montana. I had the freedom to go on adventures, to go off by myself without telling anyone where I was going. I could be gone for hours and hours and hours, and I would go up and I would play and I would pretend and I would just enjoy life, live in the moment, and that was a very valuable gift.
So sorry, I kind of cut out the beginning there, but I'm technically challenged, like I said. And so that video was used as a pilot, and then I also was tasked with identifying about a little over 60 influencers from many different groups, some of the ones I mentioned that were part of this kind of demographic transition. So we've got top chefs, athletes, social activists, hunters, people from all different walks of life, and we'll be contacting them and having them share this video with their participation on their given platforms so that their audiences can see it and again increase more and more interactions. And really what we're building here is a common ground, so when we have to have those hard conversations about compromise, about land use, about who's going to be building their pathways for the pronghorn in their backyards, we can kind of start this common conversation and be primed to be thinking about compromise when we're introducing policy. And so as WCS develops and starts to have those policies for their wildlife and their land, this is really going to be the groundwork that's going to let it go over more easily. And I'll be continuing my work with this throughout the year with WCS Rockies, the Instagram handle. So that'll be launching as soon as I start with them officially in the fall, which will be mid-September. So if you'd like to follow and kind of keep updated what we're doing, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you. And thanks to everyone who made this program happen. It's been really great for me.